I gave them 5 loyal years. But when the promotion came, they gave it to the CEO's godson. I wasn't loud, white, or well-connected. I was just excellent, and that was never enough. So I stayed quiet, built a case, and made sure they'd never overlook someone like me again. You won't want to miss this story. But before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. I'm Alina Reyes. I'm 30 years old, Southeast Asian, and I've spent the last 5 years giving every ounce of myself to a company that never truly saw me. I was the woman who always said yes. Yes to staying late, yes to fixing other people's mistakes, yes to training new hires who would leapfrog me in 6 months, yes to every mindless, thankless task handed down as if I were lucky to be asked. I never pushed back. I never said no. I never let them see how much it chipped away at me. I was proud of being dependable, of being the one they could count on to hold the line when everything else was falling apart. I thought it made me indispensable. I told myself the sacrifices would pay off, that they'd remember the weekends I gave up, the birthdays I missed, the quiet efficiency with which I held the department together while louder, shinier people took the credit. I didn't ask for applause. I just wanted fairness. I wanted a seat at the table I had spent years setting for other people. So when the senior strategist role opened, the one I'd been unofficially promised in hushed hallway conversations and after-hours pep talks from my manager, I allowed myself to hope. I updated my resume. I prepared talking points. I started imagining my name on the door. I even went shopping for a new blazer, something sharp enough to signal I was ready to lead. And then he walked in, Carter Westbrook. Fresh out of grad school, with loafers that cost more than my monthly rent and a last name that opened doors mine never could. He was charming, clueless, and connected. I was assigned to train him, show him the ropes, answer his questions, reassure the team he was a quick study. I did all that with the same professionalism I always brought to the table, even as I watched him stumble through tasks I could do blindfolded. I told myself he was temporary, that the company would see through the surface gloss, that they'd choose results over relationships. The day of the announcement, I wore the new blazer. I sat in the front row. I smiled when they praised the team, thinking my time had finally come. Then the VP said Carter's name, said he brought fresh energy and bold ideas, said he represented the future. I felt something inside me go very still, like a clock that had finally stopped ticking. I smiled anyway. I clapped with everyone else, but my hands felt hollow. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just stunned, like I had been handed a script for a role I had studied my whole life, only to be told someone else had been cast without auditioning. That was the moment I realized something brutal but necessary. They weren't going to reward my loyalty. They were going to keep using it until I was too exhausted to fight back, unless I changed the story. His name was Carter Westbrook, and from the moment he stepped into the office with his 2 white teeth and a watch that glinted like it had something to prove, I knew he wasn't here to learn. He was 24, fresh from an MBA program where I'm sure he learned more about golf swings and networking cocktails than strategy or execution. He introduced himself to the team with a handshake that was too firm and an ego that filled the room before his cologne did. I had been working there 5 years, building systems from scratch, streamlining operations, calming clients on the verge of walking. Yet the way management watched him was as if a comet had entered orbit. Everyone whispered his last name, Westbrook. At first, I thought maybe I was being cynical. Maybe he was just confident. Maybe he really was that good. Then I started noticing things. He forgot people's names, even the ones he saw every day. He asked questions he shouldn't have needed to ask, questions covered in the onboarding material I had personally written. He wandered into meetings unprepared, then made sweeping comments that added nothing but still earned nods from senior leadership. And then came the kicker, the Godfather reveal. Over lunch, someone from finance leaned in and said it quietly, like sharing a scandal. His godfather is the CEO. That's why he's here. Suddenly, everything made sense. The way our department head looked at him, the way HR scrambled to secure him an ergonomic chair his first day while I sat for 3 years on one that creaked like it was begging for mercy. I was told, with that same tight smile they used when asking me to work weekends, that I would be his mentor, that I should show him the ropes, help him get comfortable, help him shine. I did exactly that. I walked him through client systems, showed him where the files were kept, even drafted his first client pitch. I taught him how to speak the company's language, how to navigate its moods. And all the while, he smiled at me like I was a helpful older cousin, someone there to support his inevitable ascent. He never hid his ambitions. He told me, on day 3, that he planned to be in leadership within a year. I smiled back, teeth tight behind my coffee cup, and said nothing. He thought it was charm carrying him forward. It wasn't. It was the rest of us carrying him, dragging his weight while he stood on our shoulders and thought he was flying. I watched him trip through tasks that should have been simple, watched others cover for him, and when I stepped in to clean up his messes, he thanked me like I was the intern. He used the ropes I handed him not to learn, but to climb right over me, smiling all the way up like the world had always been his to rise in. And maybe it had, until now. The meeting had been set for 10 o'clock sharp, and I arrived 10 minutes early, as always, because punctuality had been one of the many unspoken rules I lived by. I wore the blazer I had been saving for this moment, deep navy with subtle pinstripes, a quiet declaration that I was ready to lead. For weeks, whispers had circulated, and my manager had dropped enough vague affirmations to make me believe this was done, settled, guaranteed. "They see you, Alina," she had said during a late evening call, when I stayed behind to troubleshoot a campaign that had gone sideways. "It's just a matter of paperwork now." So I walked into the conference room that morning, prepared for the script I had rehearsed in my head. A modest smile, a quick but gracious thank you, a promise to continue leading with the same dedication I always had. The rest of the team trickled in, some offering small, encouraging nods as they took their seats. Carter strolled in last, phone in hand, hair freshly gelled, wearing a confidence that didn't match the amount of time he had spent learning our systems. I didn't think much of it. I should have. The VP arrived, along with 2 department heads, and I felt my pulse steady with anticipation. When the announcement came, it was so carefully wrapped in business jargon that I almost missed the point. They were excited about new energy and thrilled to invest in forward-thinking leadership. They spoke about Carter's fresh perspective and bold vision. Then they said his name. My ears rang. My hands stayed folded neatly in my lap, but something in me dropped, like an elevator missing its floor. I kept my face still, trained from years of not reacting, but the corners of my smile faltered, the way a rope frays when pulled too tight. Carter grinned like a man who had just been handed a birthday cake and a key to the city. The applause that followed was polite, mechanical, the sound of people performing approval because they knew that silence would be noticed. My manager glanced at me but didn't say a word. Not then. Not when I gathered my notes with slow, practiced calm. Not when I walked back to my desk and logged into my computer like I hadn't just been erased from a moment that should have been mine. I sat there for a full hour, staring at my screen, pretending to work while a reel of memories played in my head. 5 years of late nights, crisis calls, quiet wins, sacrifices no one tallied but me. And in one announcement, they made it clear that none of it mattered. I wasn't the one they had chosen to lead. I was the one they expected to keep the engine running while someone else steered the car into the spotlight. That was the day I stopped being grateful. That was the day I started remembering everything. After the meeting, while the taste of betrayal still sat thick on my tongue, my manager pulled me aside with that practiced look of concern she reserved for office politics gone wrong, the kind where she wasn't sorry about what happened, only sorry that I had noticed. We stepped into the glass-walled side room where people usually went to cry or get written up, and she closed the door like she was doing me a kindness. "You're so steady, Alina," she began, her voice low and soothing, the way someone talks to a child they don't actually want to listen to. "You're the backbone of this team. You know that, right?" I said nothing. I just stared at the dusty succulent on the windowsill and let her continue. She spun a web of buzzwords and soft excuses, telling me how important I was, how they couldn't afford to lose me in my current role, how Carter brought a fresh perspective and new energy to the table. It wasn't about my performance, she insisted. I was excellent, always had been, but the decision came from higher up. It was out of her hands. She said it like it was meant to comfort me, like the fact that she wasn't the one holding the knife should make me feel any less stabbed. I nodded because that's what I had been trained to do. Nodding was safer than speaking. Nodding kept you from crying. Nodding meant they could move on feeling like they had done their part. This isn't a setback, she added brightly, like putting a bow on a corpse. We're just asking you to keep doing what you do best. What I do best, apparently, is hold a team together while someone less qualified gets the credit. What I do best is clean up messes, organize chaos, deliver results, and stay out of sight. What I do best is accept the crumbs while someone else eats the feast I prepared. She wanted me to take it. Smile, be graceful, be the bigger person. And for a moment, I almost did. Old habits clung tightly to me, reminding me that speaking up meant being labeled difficult, emotional, ungrateful. But something had shifted. Something hard and sharp had taken root inside me, like a splinter of glass that had finally pierced deep enough to draw blood. I left that room with my head held high, but it was no longer out of pride. It was out of clarity. They weren't going to fix this. They weren't going to make it right. They had made their choice, and they were counting on me to keep swallowing it like I always had. But this time, I tasted every word, every hollow compliment, every fake apology, every excuse wrapped in kindness. I walked back to my desk and opened a blank document. I didn't know what I would write yet, but I knew it would matter. I was done swallowing. From that moment forward, I would start keeping receipts. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out or make a scene or do anything dramatic that they could later point to and say, "See, this is why she wasn't ready." Instead, I did what I've always done best. I stayed calm. I got organized. I turned my heartbreak into a system. Every time Carter sent me a sloppy draft, I saved both versions, his and the one I fixed. Every Slack ping that started with, "Hey Alina, quick question," went into a folder, each one time-stamped and cataloged like artifacts from an archaeological dig of dysfunction. I started forwarding key emails to a private account. Subject lines like, "Can you take a look at this for me?" and "Mind jumping in on this client call?" began to pile up like autumn leaves. I never volunteered to rake. At first, I told myself it was for my own sanity, a way to remind myself I wasn't imagining it, that I was, in fact, doing the job he got praised for. But the more I gathered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or office politics. This was a pattern. This was a case. My inbox became a quiet battlefield, and every forwarded message was another arrow in my quiver. I took screenshots of messages that vanished after being edited. I downloaded chat logs. I saved performance dashboards where my numbers glowed quietly while his sputtered out like a bad engine. I kept it all on a password-protected drive labeled Garden Plans, and I smiled a little every time I added a new file. Some nights I stayed late, not because I had to, but because I needed the quiet. Needed to sit at my desk while the office emptied and let the truth arrange itself on my screen. The truth that Carter didn't know how to lead. The truth that the team leaned on me like scaffolding while he posed for the pictures. I started watching meetings differently. I noticed who spoke and who listened. Who watched me when Carter fumbled and who looked away, ashamed. I began to see the fear in their eyes. Not of me, but of the system we were all caught in. A machine that chewed up capable people and spat out charm. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just kept collecting. Like a patient scientist watching a failed experiment collapse in slow motion. They thought I was being quiet because I was obedient, because I was grateful just to be in the room. But I wasn't quiet anymore. I was recording. I was remembering. I was laying bricks in a wall they wouldn't see until it was too high to climb. They handed me the rope and assumed I'd use it to pull someone else up. But I was braiding it into a ladder of my own. One receipt at a time. I submitted the PTO request with a calmness that didn't match the storm brewing behind my ribs. Just 1 week. My first real break in 5 years. No one questioned it, because they couldn't. The system I had silently upheld didn't allow for denial, only discomfort. My manager smiled stiffly and said, "Of course, you've earned it," like the words burned her throat on the way out. Carter clapped me on the back and told me to enjoy the beach, even though I never said where I was going. I wasn't going anywhere special. I just wanted stillness. A full week to sit in silence, to read something that wasn't a project brief, to let my body remember what it felt like to wake up without dread. I turned off my work notifications for the first time since I had been hired. The first 2 days were uneventful, or so I thought. By Wednesday, the messages started slipping through in waves, like cracks forming in a dam. I didn't read them, but I saw the previews. Do you happen to remember where? And Carter said you usually handle, and client is asking about the timeline. I put my phone face down and went back to my tea. By Friday, I caved and checked my inbox. Deadlines had been missed. A client had threatened to walk. An entire campaign had gone live with the wrong assets. And no one had noticed until the social media manager was bombarded with angry DMs. Carter had apparently called an emergency meeting, fumbled through excuses, and redirected blame with the grace of a toddler tossing spaghetti at a wall. No one bought it, not even the executives. When I returned Monday morning, the office was quieter than usual. The air carried the heavy scent of fear, like something had been scorched, and everyone was pretending not to smell the smoke. My manager greeted me with a strained smile and said, "We're so glad you're back." Carter didn't make eye contact. The others nodded a little too eagerly when I walked in, the way people greet the power grid after a blackout. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I just rolled up my sleeves and started fixing what had been broken while I was gone. Within 3 days, everything was back on track. Reports balanced, clients soothed. The machine began humming again, but this time, everyone knew who had the keys. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't announce my value. I just let the absence speak louder than my presence ever had. And it did. It screamed. They had always known I was reliable. What they hadn't realized until now was that I was essential. I was the thread holding the whole thing together. And when I stepped away, even for 1 week, the seams split wide open. I returned without fanfare, without confrontation, and stitched it all back up. But this time, I did it with my eyes wide open. This time, I was watching who watched me. It had been sitting in the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't quite reach. The memory of Mira's sudden resignation and how no one ever really talked about it afterward. One day, she was leading our team with grace and grit. The next, she was gone. Her desk cleared out before lunch, her name quietly deleted from calendars like she had never existed. At the time, I assumed it was burnout. She had always carried more than her share, always covered for people too entitled to see the weight they placed on her shoulders. But now, with the way things had unraveled around Carter, I found myself wondering if maybe Mira hadn't burned out at all. Maybe she had been pushed out. So I reached out, a simple message. "Hope you're well. Would love to catch up." She replied within the hour, and we met that Friday at a small cafe on the edge of the city, the kind of place where no one wore name tags, and the music was just loud enough to make eavesdropping difficult. Mira looked the same, just more rested. Her eyes were no longer ringed with exhaustion. She smiled when she saw me, but it faded the moment I said why I had really come. I asked her what happened. I told her about Carter, about the promotion, about the chaos during my week off, about how I had given 5 years and gotten silence in return. She didn't act surprised. She didn't gasp or frown or ask me to clarify. She just sipped her tea and nodded like she had been waiting for me to finally see the truth for myself. She said she had been promised a promotion too, one she had earned through long nights and measurable results, one they dangled in front of her like a carrot tied to a stick she would never be allowed to reach. She told me how the role was quietly handed to a man from another department, someone who shared a college history with one of the executives. No interview, no explanation. Just a meeting invite that didn't include her. She said when she asked why, they gave her the same tired script I had been fed. "You're so essential where you are." This wasn't personal. "You'll have other opportunities." Mira looked me dead in the eyes and said something I will never forget. "They'll never promote you, Alina. They'll just use you to make others look competent." It hit like a stone to the chest. Not because I didn't already suspect it, but because hearing it out loud from someone I respected confirmed everything I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't about merit. It never had been. It was about names. Proximity. Comfort. It was about them needing someone to quietly do the work while they played favorites in the spotlight. Mira told me she left because she realized her dignity was worth more than their crumbs. I walked away from that cafe knowing something I hadn't before. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't imagining it. This wasn't accidental. It was designed. There is a strange kind of power in withholding what once came freely. I had spent years smoothing over the rough edges of other people's incompetence, cleaning up errors before they were noticed, guiding conversations back on track when someone like Carter wandered too far off course. But after Mira's words, something in me shifted. I stopped, not with malice, not with vengeance, just with precision. I stopped correcting Carter when he misquoted data in meetings. I stopped reminding him of client calls he forgot to prepare for. I stopped rereading his drafts before they were sent to leadership, even when I knew the typos would glare like bruises on a white shirt. I let the silences hang when someone asked a question, and Carter stumbled through an answer that made less sense the longer he spoke. I let the awkward pauses grow legs and walk through the room. I let the consequences come, not because I wanted chaos, but because I wanted truth. I wanted everyone to see what I had known all along. That underneath the charm and the polished shoes was a man who had been handed authority he had no business holding. He started to sweat more in meetings, stammer more, depend more heavily on buzzwords he barely understood. The team started glancing at me again, the way you glance at a lifeguard when someone starts flailing in deep water. But I never jumped in. Not until I was asked. And when I was asked, I was calm. I was prepared. I never threw him under the bus. I just answered the question. Clearly, concisely, correctly. The contrast did all the talking for me. Executives began scheduling side chats with me. Nothing official, just a quick 5 minutes after a disaster of a presentation. I never named names. I didn't need to. They weren't blind. They had just chosen not to look. Now they were looking. I cleaned what mattered and left the rest untouched. When a client asked about a deliverable Carter had missed, I forwarded the thread without comment. When a deadline was pushed because he forgot to loop in the design team, I let the project tracker speak for itself. I became the quiet witness to his unraveling. He didn't notice at first. He thought I was busy, thought I was just giving him space, thought my silence was still working in his favor. But silence, when used intentionally, is a scalpel, and I wielded it with care. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't loud. I just became unseen on purpose. A shadow that watched, recorded, and revealed. The kind of shadow that slowly turns the lights on in a room where everyone pretended not to see. The more I disappeared from his side, the more obvious it became who had actually kept the engine running. And once people started asking the right questions, all I had to do was keep doing exactly what I was doing. Which was nothing. Nothing at all. Q3 arrived like a mirror no one wanted to look into, and the reflection was unforgiving. The retention chart that had once climbed like a steady hillside now dipped into a cold valley. Deliverables slid past due dates and sat there like luggage abandoned on a carousel. Pipelines that used to hum with predictable rhythms stuttered and coughed. The weekly revenue snapshot, once a quiet reassurance, became a noise you felt in your teeth. People stopped joking in stand-ups. Small talk dried up. Even the office plants seemed to lean away from the light. The narrative that had been carefully crafted around Carter began to loosen at the seams. Fresh perspective, they had said. Bold vision, they had said. Then the numbers answered back with a simple, unavoidable truth. Nothing was landing. Clients who once sent holiday baskets were now sending escalation emails. A flagship account asked for a pause to reassess, which is the kind of pause that often means goodbye. Through it all, I stayed quiet in public. I attended the meetings, offered neutral updates, and took notes that I knew I would never need to reread. I was present without performing, and the absence of my performance was its own kind of performance. Behind closed doors, the phone calls began, not from my manager, from higher. An SVP who had never learned my last name now remembered it perfectly. A director from finance asked for context, then asked again with a different tone. The executive VP, who always moved with the pace of someone late to the airport, scheduled time and showed up early. Each conversation circled the same unease until someone finally asked the question they had been trying to avoid. Alina, what is really going on? I let the silence sit for a heartbeat, the way a doctor lets the stethoscope warm between their palms, and then I gave the same answer every time. Would you like me to show you? I shared my screen. I opened dashboards that had been ignored when they were green, and now glowed with the red of avoidable mistakes. I pulled up timelines where approvals lagged, where Carter's sign-offs arrived after launch windows, where dependencies had been treated like decorations instead of load-bearing beams. I clicked into email threads that began with my name and ended with my fixes, the breadcrumb trail of who requested help, who promised to handle it, who vanished when the work got heavy. I did not add commentary. I did not editorialize. I did not sharpen the knife. I let the numbers narrate their own story, and the story was simple. The work ran when I touched it. The work stalled when I did not. The patterns that had felt personal in my body sounded mathematical in their ears, and math has a way of stripping excuses from even the most charming mouths. No one defended Carter out loud. There was only the soft, shuffling sound of people rearranging their understanding. When the meetings ended, I closed the folders and went back to my desk. I had not raised my voice. I had not demanded anything. I had simply turned the lights on and watched them see. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, tucked neatly into the inboxes of HR, legal, and 2 executive leaders. The subject line was polite but cold. Internal performance concerns. Supporting documentation attached. The sender was listed as anonymous, but I knew every file in that zip folder like the lines in my own palm. There were no accusations, just facts. Screenshots of emails where Carter took credit for projects he never touched. Slack messages where he asked the same questions again and again, never retaining the answers. Timelines showing how deadlines had been shifted, not by market fluctuations or client requests, but by simple neglect. A spreadsheet outlining key accounts and their activity since his promotion, with red cells marking missed calls, canceled meetings, and the sharp drop in satisfaction scores that no amount of spin could hide. There was a folder labeled Fixes that contained every instance I had stepped in to correct his work. Not with fanfare, not with recognition, but with timestamps and proof. I had written the report slowly, over months, adding to it piece by piece when the moments were too sharp to forget. It was never a rage document. It was a record, a way to stay sane. A way to remind myself that I was not crazy, that what was happening was real, measurable, and cruel. I had scrubbed it clean of tone, no bitterness, no speculation. Just dates, deliverables, and who did what. When I sent it, I used a private server and watched the progress bar crawl across my screen like it was dragging the truth behind it. I went into work that day with the same neutral expression I always wore, but something in the air had shifted. You could feel it in the way conversations stuttered, in how people glanced toward closed doors more than usual. HR held 2 meetings that day, then 3 the next. Legal started requesting files, ones no one ever asked for unless something serious was underway. Carter tried to stay calm. He still wore that practiced grin, still tossed casual jokes across cubicles, but the edges of him were starting to fray. He checked his phone more, left for walks he never used to take, called meetings and forgot why he called them. I watched from my desk, not with triumph, but with stillness, like someone waiting to see if a structure would hold after the support beams had been quietly removed. The report didn't say my name. No one could trace it, but I knew they knew. I knew they were starting to connect the dots they had ignored for so long. It was not just a file. It was a mirror, held up to a system that had allowed charm to outshine competence for far too long. And now that mirror had cracks running through every corner office. The beautiful thing about truth is that once it is documented, once it is organized, once it is undeniable, it does not need a voice. It simply waits to be read. The calendar invite came in just after lunch. Subject line simple and sterile. Quick chat. It was from the executive VP's office, someone I had spoken to exactly twice in 5 years, both times in passing, both times involving someone else's success. The meeting room was on the top floor, far from the clatter of my department, where the windows stretched wide and the carpets absorbed every footstep. I expected tension. I expected suspicion. I expected to be asked if I knew anything about the anonymous file making its rounds. But when I walked in, I was not accused. I was not cornered. I was asked. Genuinely, respectfully, almost delicately. "What would you do differently if you ran this team?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I had waited 5 years to be asked, and I wanted to be sure I got it right. I kept my voice steady, measured. I spoke in facts, not feelings. I talked about systems that rewarded presence over output, about metrics that favored visibility over value. I described how high performers were often buried under the weight of supporting those who were louder, better connected, or more easily excused. I laid out the inefficiencies, the duplication of efforts, the energy wasted on fixing work that should never have needed fixing. Then they asked what I would change, and I told them. I would restructure communication flows, align accountability with authority, implement transparent project ownership where credit and responsibility walked hand in hand. I would create feedback loops that didn't punish honesty and reviews that looked beyond optics. I spoke clearly, but not aggressively. Firm, not defensive. I made it about the work, the structure, the outcomes, but between the lines, I know they heard what I was really saying. That this entire time, I had been leading in silence. That while Carter was celebrated, I had been building. They nodded, occasionally jotting something down, occasionally exchanging glances like they were realizing things they should have realized long ago. No one mentioned the report. No one had to. Its shadow lived in the room with us, heavy and undeniable. What surprised me most was how much they listened. Not just waited for their turn to speak, but actually listened. When I finished, there was a pause, a quiet one, the kind that usually follows truth landing too hard on polished floors. One of them leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said softly, "You've clearly thought about this." And I said yes, because I had. For 5 years I had been thinking, watching, adjusting, surviving. Not just doing my job, but understanding the entire ecosystem around it. I had known its weaknesses. I had learned its blind spots. And now they were finally seeing them too. The meeting ended without promises. No titles were offered. No declarations made. But something had shifted. When I walked out of that room, I knew something they did not. That the moment you stop begging for a seat at the table is the moment people start asking if you should be building the table yourself. It happened so quietly, I almost missed it. One Friday, Carter just didn't show up. No last-minute meeting cancellations, no email saying he was running late, no awkward excuse about traffic or an appointment. His desk sat untouched, the chair slightly askew, his coffee mug still half full like he had just stepped out for a minute, but he never returned. By noon, whispers were running like water through the office. Someone said they saw him leave the building Thursday looking pale. Someone else mentioned a closed-door meeting with HR that lasted too long and ended too quietly. No one confirmed anything. No one knew for sure. Monday morning, an email arrived from the department head. The subject line read, "Team Update," and the message itself was only 3 sentences long. Carter Westbrook has decided to pursue new opportunities. We wish him well in his future endeavors. Please direct any project-related inquiries to Alina Reyes. That was it. No farewell Zoom, no group card signed in blue ink, no last day lunch or awkward cupcakes in the break room, just a quiet deletion, like dragging a desktop icon to the trash and pretending it had never taken up space. There was no ceremony because there was no legacy to honor, just a trail of missed deadlines and a dozen quiet acknowledgments that something overdue had finally been corrected. I said nothing. I acted surprised. I nodded when people speculated, but inside, there was only stillness. Not relief, not triumph. Just the cool, clean air that follows after something heavy is finally lifted. What lingered more than the announcement itself was the way people looked at me afterward. The eyes that used to slide past me in meetings now paused, just for a beat longer. Colleagues who had once spoken to me only when something was broken now offered hellos in the hallway. A nod of respect folded into small talk. It wasn't dramatic. No one said anything out loud. But I could feel it, a recalibration, a recognition, like they were finally adjusting the lens through which they had seen me all along. I kept moving the way I always had. I showed up on time. I answered emails. I fixed what was still broken, but the balance had shifted, just enough to be felt. People started checking with me before decisions were made. I was added to meetings I had previously been excluded from. My feedback was requested instead of assumed. I never mentioned Carter. I never asked where he went. I never spoke of the file, or the questions, or the truth that had slowly risen like water in a sinking boat. I didn't need to. His absence said everything my presence never could. And now that he was gone, what remained was undeniable. I was still here, still standing, still steady. The scaffolding that had held everything up was no longer invisible, and no one could pretend not to know who had been holding the weight all along. The invitation came in the form of a short email from the executive VP's office. No subject line fluff, just my name and a time. When I stepped off the elevator and walked into the conference room, it was just him and the director of operations, both seated at the long glass table with a folder between them like something sacred. They greeted me with the kind of calm usually reserved for delicate negotiations, not performance reviews. No pleasantries, no small talk, just a slow unfolding of words I had waited years to hear. They offered me a new role, senior strategy lead, bigger title, a significant raise, and most importantly, full autonomy over process, direction, and staffing. They spoke about restructuring, about lessons learned, about the future of the department. They didn't say Carter's name, but his absence sat in the room like a ghost everyone had silently agreed not to mention. I listened carefully, asked a few pointed questions, then took a quiet breath before answering. I said yes, but only under one condition. I wanted to build my own team. No more inheriting chaos. No more dragging underperformers across the finish line while they smiled for the photo. No more cleaning up behind the scenes while someone else delivered the pitch. I wanted to hire the people who had been overlooked. The quiet ones, the sharp ones. The ones who never played the politics game because they were too busy doing the work. I wanted to choose collaborators, not passengers. I wanted transparency, ownership, and the room to lead, without having to beg for respect every step of the way. The VP nodded slowly, as if he had expected this, maybe even hoped for it. He slid the folder toward me and said, "It's yours to shape." I opened it and saw my new title printed neatly at the top of the offer letter, followed by numbers that made my chest tighten, not because they were extravagant, but because they finally reflected the value I had carried without recognition for far too long. I signed it with a steady hand. As I walked back down to my floor, offer letter tucked neatly in my bag, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not excitement, not even satisfaction, but clarity. This wasn't a reward. This wasn't a gift. This was balance. This was truth, finally tipping in the right direction. At my desk, I opened a new spreadsheet and typed 3 names into the top row. 3 people I already knew I would bring with me when the time came. People who had worked in the background, like I had, waiting for someone to finally give them a chance. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair. I hadn't raised my voice to get here. I hadn't played their game. I had just outlasted them. And now, finally, I was being handed the pieces. But this time, I would build something no one else could take from me. Her name was Noor, and I remembered her from a client call over a year ago, where she had jumped in mid-meeting to correct a budgeting oversight that wasn't even her responsibility. She had done it calmly, factually, without embarrassment or ego, just a clear voice and a well-prepared spreadsheet. After the call, I had sent her a private message thanking her, and she had replied with a simple, "Just doing my job." But I remembered her. I remembered how she had spoken with certainty, and how no one in that room had looked at her twice, even after she saved them from a major mistake. So when the time came to build my own team, she was the first person I called. I offered her the role of Senior Insights Analyst, and she hesitated for a moment before asking, "Are you sure?" I told her I had never been more sure. She said yes. Then I called Marcus, a project coordinator who had been stuck in the same title for 4 years because he wasn't flashy enough, though he had single-handedly kept 3 launch calendars from falling apart. I called Priya, a junior strategist who once pulled together a pitch deck in 2 hours after her manager bailed, only to be told, "Thanks, we'll let him present it since it's his account." Each one of them came with stories like mine. Stories of being needed but not valued, of being essential but never elevated. We didn't talk much about it at first. We just worked. But the change was immediate. Deadlines stopped slipping. Meetings became purposeful. Everyone came prepared not because they were afraid, but because they cared. We shared wins. We asked for help without shame. There were no power games, no gatekeeping, just clarity and contribution. Slowly, the department started to take notice. Other teams asked to borrow my people. Senior leadership started requesting our input earlier in the process, not as an afterthought, but as strategy. People who had once walked past Noor in the break room now asked her to lead sessions, her calendar filled with invites she used to watch others receive. I never made speeches. I never announced what we were doing differently. I just let the work speak. I let the data prove what talent could do when it was not stifled by ego or buried beneath someone else's name. Culture doesn't shift with slogans. It shifts with patterns, with repeated evidence that something better is possible. We built something better, quietly, deliberately. Like I had built everything else in my career. The only difference was now I wasn't building alone. For the first time, I was not the only one watching the gap between effort and recognition. I was not the only one pulling others forward. I was surrounded by people who had once felt invisible and now were being seen for what they always were. Brilliant, necessary, and finally, unstoppable. I don't sit in my office thinking about Carter. I don't replay the meetings where he fumbled, or the emails he forwarded for me to clean up. I don't scroll back through the messages he once sent asking for help like I was a walking instruction manual with no expiration date. I don't think about his promotion, his absence, or the silent way he disappeared from a company that never truly held him accountable. Instead, I think about the girl I used to be. The one who said yes to everything because she thought saying yes would make her indispensable. The one who skipped lunches, stayed late, smiled through every dismissal, and held her tongue through every insult disguised as a compliment. I think about the version of me who believed that loyalty alone would be enough to earn respect, who thought being useful meant being valued. I wish I could go back and tell her she didn't need to keep proving herself to people who had already decided not to see her, that surviving a broken system is not the same as thriving in one. That competence without recognition is not humility, it's erasure. But I also thank her, because she endured long enough to reach this version of me, the one who doesn't chase validation, the one who knows her worth and demands others meet it. I didn't burn the place down. I didn't scream or sabotage or gloat. I just got so good they could no longer ignore me. I learned to move with quiet certainty, to let the results speak louder than any complaint ever could. I built something from the margins. I turned whispers into evidence. I made the system reveal itself. Not through force, but through precision. And now I sit at a different table, one with a nameplate that carries weight and a voice that gets heard the first time. I don't use that power to punish. I use it to protect, to open doors for the ones still waiting to be seen, to ask the questions I used to wish someone would ask me. I look across the room and I see people like Noor, like Marcus, like Priya. People who once got passed over now running meetings, now presenting to executives, now rewriting what leadership looks like. We don't wear armor, we wear intention, and the room is better because of it. I know the game now, and I've changed the rules. I no longer ask for a seat. I build new tables. I shape the conversation. I define the criteria. I am not here because I was chosen. I am here because I made it impossible not to be. I was once invisible, buried beneath someone else's spotlight. Now I am the one deciding who gets seen. And the best part is knowing that the next person who reminds me of the girl I used to be will never have to wait as long as I did to be recognized. Not on my watch.